anxiety to central bankers who are trying to manage and control inflation, so their reaction to that will be to raise interest rates. The knock-on effect of that could be to throttle down, to choke off what is still a very fragile recovery from the recession.
The fighting in Libya has already pushed the oil price to a 2.5-year high. Fear of unrest across the region could push it even higher. The effects of the uprising now being felt far beyond Libya's borders. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
Well, meanwhile, speaking in London, Britain's foreign minister has said a no-fly zone over Libya to stop attacks from the air is still being discussed.
Work is going on in NATO on the contingency planning for this, so it is certainly a practical possibility. It has to have, though, the other factors that I was mentioning earlier. It has to have a clear legal base. It has to have the necessary international support, broad support in the region itself. Now, clearly there are elements of those things there. In terms of, as I mentioned earlier, the statement of the GCC, and clearly the opposition forces in Libya itself have already called for a no-fly zone. So those things are practical, but the broad international support and legal base for it would also have to be there.
I'll have more news from Europe a little later this hour, including a temporary reprieve for the former French President Jacques Chirac.
Now, a Cash for Work programme paid for by the US has been set up in Afghanistan. One project that pays people to clear canals and repair property attracted almost 2,000 men in 1 week. But there are concerns over who exactly is benefiting. Al Jazeera's Sue Turton has this exclusive report from Zaray district.
Buying their way into the Taliban heartland, a US programme in the district of Zaray in Kandahar that pays local people to work. Clearing canals or fixing up bombed buildings can earn them $40 a week. It's proved hugely popular. Over 1,500 workers turned up last week from all walks of life.
We're not naive enough to think that there are no Taliban working for us. In an area where the Taliban was born and really came to power, frankly, of 1,400 people, there are going to be some that are Taliban. And that's okay, because as long as they're here to help us rebuild and they're not causing problems, planting IEDs, shooting at us, then we're okay with that.
But even with some Taliban working amongst them, joining this American project is a risky business. This airstrike had to be called in after the Taliban attacked one Cash for Work site, injuring an ISAF soldier who was guarding the workers. They've warned others to stay away.
We're scared. There's no difference between you and me for the Taliban. They would slit our throats because we're working for the Americans.
The Taliban told my father he shouldn't work here.
As the foreman handed out the weekly wages, we saw some of the money being handed to men in a parked car. We're told at least half of it goes to the Taliban. One senior Afghan officer at the base said he now thinks the project is doing more harm than good. It's not the only outreach project they have. A makeshift clinic hands out medicines, and it's soon to be replaced with something more substantial.
3 months ago, the decision was made to leave a more solid legacy behind. These 4 buildings will house a school, a clinic, an agricultural training centre and a shura, a meeting room. The hope is that these bricks and mortar will stand firm against the Taliban in the fighting season and act as a reminder that the US forces provided them with something the Taliban didn't.
Word of the Cash for Work programme reached a neighbouring district. Elders turned up at the US outpost to ask the Americans to set one up locally. It's a good sign if the money goes to them and not to bolster the Taliban's funds. Sue Turton, Al Jazeera, Kandahar.
21 of the 23 kidnapped employees of a Canadian oil firm have been released in Colombia. The men were snatched on Monday. It's believed one hostage managed to escape. Colombian soldiers have been deployed to the remote eastern jungle region to free the remaining hostages. In Mexico, 18 people have died in the northeastern town of Abasolo. The area is at the center of a turf war between rival drug gangs. State and federal security forces have been sent to restore order. It was one of his most famous presidential pledges to close Guantanamo Bay prison camp and move military trials to civilian courts. But the detention center in Cuba remains open, and now Barack Obama has taken a U-turn by ordering military trials to resume. John Terrett reports.
Promptly to close.
Just after he took office, President Obama promised to keep a campaign pledge and close Guantanamo within 1 year.
It is a rallying cry for our enemies. It sets back the willingness of our allies to work with us in fighting an enemy that operates in scores of countries. By any measure, the cost of keeping it open far exceed the complications involved in closing it.
Obama also stopped the controversial Bush-era military trial system and promised a full review. Now, 2 years on, Guantanamo's still open and the military trials are back. The White House says it's made the system fairer, but critics see it as a return to square one.
The ironic aspect of this is that President Bush established this kind of review mechanism. President Obama set up this kind of a mechanism when he took office, and now this is the third iteration. I have no reason to believe that this new system is going to be any better than the two systems that it has already replaced.
The issue of what to do about Guantanamo Bay has dogged Obama's presidency from the beginning. His political opponents and some of those in his own party have blocked his efforts. The White House wanted to move and try some detainees in U.S. courts, but Congress made that impossible. Obama has also found it hard to find countries willing to take those released from Guantanamo, and his administration now says some prisoners will just stay locked up without trial indefinitely. Now that the review into detention policy at Guantanamo Bay has been completed, charges are expected soon for at least 3 detainees who were charged under the Bush administration and who've been deemed eligible to stand trial, but whose cases were dropped in 2009 so the review could take place. John Terrett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, let's get some more news from Europe now, and another embattled leader. Back to Felicity in London.
That's right, Sheila. Yes, the former French President Jacques Chirac has won a temporary reprieve, though, after a judge decided to suspend his corruption trial. Let's take you straight to Tim Friend in Paris to find out why. So, Tim, what is the reason behind this?
Well, one of Jacques Chirac's co-defendants successfully argued in court that the charges are so old now, or relate to events that are about 20 years ago, that the Constitutional Court, a higher court, should now look at them and decide whether they are still valid. So while the Constitutional Court looks at that, the actual trial itself has to be postponed, and it's now likely that Mr. Chirac will not appear in court until, say, the end of June, when they'll be ready in the court behind me here to restart the proceedings.
Just remind us, Tim, exactly what Chirac is accused of.
Well, all these charges surround the time when he was mayor of Paris, and he was mayor of Paris for a total of 18 years, as well as being president twice and prime minister twice as well. But these events came towards the end of his time as Paris mayor, when he was still fighting very hard to become president for the first time, and it's alleged that he used